Who is your favorite NFL team's worst draft bust? NFL draftees can suck for a multitude of reasons. Attitude problems, laziness, poor work ethic, legal issues, skills that don't translate to the pros like scouts thought they would. They might just suck at football. Now for this video, to be very clear, I am looking for draft busts, not draft disappointments. And I get that bust is the all-encompassing term for a player who doesn't live up to their draft potential or where they were taken in the draft, but here there is nuance. A draft disappointment is a player who is like, man, that was a bummer that didn't work out. A draft bust is a guy that people look at and go, what the was that? Now, to fit this criteria, I am looking for a player who did not get a second contract at all with the team that drafted them. Because those teams were like, oh, we got to get rid of this guy now. I'm also looking to avoid injury busts. I'm also going to avoid recency bias. I'm looking for people who were given a fair shot, but they did not live up to where they were taken in the draft. And it's also not just that they flamed out, it's why they flamed out. The more insane the backstory, the more bonus points they get. But instead of going in alphabetical order like I normally do, I'm going to put each team's bust into a tier. So let's get started. Tier number 1 is 2020 squirrel misplaces a nut every once in a while. It's the reverse of blind squirrel finds a nut. This is for teams who usually draft pretty well, but they've had a couple busts, as do all teams. And there's only one team on this tier. It is the New England Patriots, whose biggest draft bust is N'Keal Harry. No part of me wanted to put N'Keal Harry as the Patriots' biggest draft bust. I'm trying to avoid recency bias. It seems like the Nahak answer. After going through pick after pick after pick, going through guys like Tony Eason, who was selected in 1983, in 1982 number 1 overall pick Kenneth Sims, who both fall into the draft disappointments category, N'Keal Harry stood out to me in the worst way possible. He was taken 32nd overall by the Patriots in 2019, and before I forget to say it, he was taken ahead of guys like Deebo Samuel, AJ Brown, JJ Arcega-Whiteside, and DK Metcalf. The Patriots organization and Patriots fans themselves were sold on N'Keal Harry's ability as a possession receiver who can make acrobatic catches as if they learned nothing from Aaron Dobson. N'Keal Harry made 18 starts for New England in his 3 years there, but he was woefully underwhelming, particularly with his inability to separate as a receiver, increasing tenfold once he reached the NFL. For the Patriots, he never had more than 300 yards in a season, he only had 3 career games with at least 5 catches, and he only had 4 career games with over 40 receiving yards. He requested a trade after the 2021 season, after which he was shipped off to Chicago. On the bright side, the 2026 offseason allowed the Patriots to finally have a receiver from the 2019 class that actually panned out. We are now moving on to tier number 2, which is named Quarterback Bias Incorporated. Might yell at me in the comments. Because for these teams, the quarterback is kind of like a default go-to answer. But there are other guys who were more bust than disappointment. For the Baltimore Ravens, their biggest draft bust is Matt Elam. For those of you expecting to see Kyle Bowler, sorry, I get it. I fully do. He did not live up to his potential. He was much more of a disappointment than a bust. He was a mediocre quarterback that the Ravens traded 2 premium draft picks to get, and I understand that one of those draft picks turned into Vince Wilfork. The Ravens have not had a lot of NFL draft misses, even though the 3 things most certain in life are death, taxes, and Ravens draft needs : wide receiver. It's an annual tradition unlike any other. But that said, of the 31 players taken from 1996 to 2023 in the first round, 19 of them have been Pro Bowlers, and 3 of them, Ray Lewis, Jonathan Ogden, and Ed Reed, are Hall of Famers. But let's talk about one that didn't pan out: Matt Elam. Matt Elam was a player the Ravens badly needed, as Ed Reed had just walked in free agency, and they were hoping that the first-team All-American from 2012 would develop into a viable replacement. His development was going according to plan in his rookie season, and then it just stopped on a dime. His playing time rapidly decreased after his rookie season. His ability declined, he did deal with some injuries, and he didn't start a single game in the NFL after his second season. After a drug arrest in 2017, the Ravens succinctly stated, Matt Elam is not in our plans for 2017. He has since bounced around football leagues, not teams, leagues, and he most recently played in the Indoor Football League for the San Antonio Gunslingers. Moving on to the biggest draft bust for the Houston Texans, Kenyon Green. Now, this is where everyone expects me to put David Carr. And before you say, their biggest bust is David Carr, couple things. 1, I'm not gonna do that. 2, shut the up, it's my video. And 3, I'll explain myself. A big misconception people have about quarterbacks, especially rookie ones, is that they're gonna come in and solve all of that organization's problems. David Carr was the quarterback for the Texans as they began their franchise. He still, to this day, holds the NFL record for sacks taken in a season with 76, and that took place in his rookie season. He led the league in sacks taken in 3 of his 5 years as the starter for the Texans. To call him the Texans' biggest draft bust is unfair. His offensive line was, as we say, garbage. Speaking of garbage offensive linemen, Kenyon Green. Kenyon Green was taken 15th overall in the 2022 NFL Draft that was littered with offensive line busts. In his rookie season, he had a 37.7 PFF grade, which was the literal worst grade among qualifying guards in the entire NFL. Among guards, he had 31 pressures allowed, 5th most in the league, as well as 12 QB hits and 47 QB pressures allowed, both 4th most in the NFL. He missed all of 2023 with a shoulder injury, but he did return in 2024, only to disappoint. Again, he was soon traded to the Eagles for CJ Gardner-Johnson, and that trade included a swap of draft picks. He spent some time with 2 bird teams, and as of the recording of this video, 4 years after being the first guard taken in the 2022 NFL Draft, he is currently a free agent at only 25 years old. The next team we're going to talk about is the Kansas City Chiefs, whose worst draft bust was Trezell Jenkins. Todd Blackledge is the go-to selection, and he was very nearly my selection here. But he was much more of a disappointment than a bust. Despite his winning record, he was statistically extremely mediocre. To make matters worse, players like Jim Kelly, Dan Marino, and Ned's Declassified School Survival Guide guest star Willie Gault were all drafted after him. He was very below average and completely out of the NFL by 1989. Trezell Jenkins, on the other hand, was a nonsensical draft pick, and at the time, experts were befuddled. And those draft experts were proven right, especially given the fact that at the time, the Chiefs did not need an offensive tackle. The player at the right tackle position at that time was John Alt, and yes, his last name should sound familiar to you. Trezell Jenkins was drafted on measurables and college pedigree, which is my way of saying he was huge and went to Michigan. The Chiefs took him with a 31st overall pick in the 1995 NFL Draft, and even with those measurables, he was considered a major reach, with some draft experts believing he'd be available in the 7th round. The thing was, though, he never developed, and he also pissed off multiple defensive stars. Hall of Fame linebacker Derek Thomas gave him the nickname Stealth, a nickname inspired by an ill-fated military project, due to him being an expensive investment that never reached his full potential, which is a long-winded way of saying bust. He even got on a fight on the practice field with 4-time Pro Bowl defensive end Neil Smith that boiled over to a hotel room. Trezell Jenkins was barely active to begin his career, as he was only active for a single game in his rookie season, largely due to the Chiefs' already stout offensive line and his severe lack of development. He started 1 game in his NFL career for the Chiefs, which was a 19-3 loss to the Denver Broncos. And that makes him one of 5 first-round offensive linemen since the merger to start 1 game or fewer in the NFL. He was cut after week 3 in 1997, and he never played it down again in the NFL. Tier number 3 is recency bias elementary school. Will yell at me in the comments. First up, the Chicago Bears' biggest draft bust, Cade McNown. The common selection for the Bears is running back Curtis Enis, whose name was way too close to penis for me to make a bunch of dumb jokes. Curtis Enis dealt with injuries and ineffective play in his 3 years in Chicago. But who was under center for the Bills at that time and never once dealt with an injury? Cade McNown. Cade McNown, whose only immortalization was in backyard football, was a mediocre player and a total prick in Chicago. He responded to booing Bears fans by telling them to stay at home and boo their TV instead, meaning he didn't realize how fun it is to boo someone in person. But wait, there's more. He reportedly didn't put in full effort in off-season training programs and was even seen leaving those programs early. He was quoted as saying his receivers were tired after he overthrew them, but really those receivers were slowing down because Cade McNown was underthrowing them. The quarterback is the unquestioned leader of the clubhouse, and if you say shit like that, everyone's gonna think you're a total dickhead. He embraced the celebrity party lifestyle instead of football, and it's okay to do that if you're good in the NFL, which Cade McNown was not. He was, no exaggeration, a Playboy Mansion regular until Hugh Hefner banned him. Cade McNown won over Baywatch actress Brandy Roderick, dated her for a year, and also took her to Mexico. So to recap, some dude went into a palace and rescued a beautiful blonde woman from a known monster. Dare I say, Cade McNown probably wouldn't have been allowed in the Playboy Mansion long anyway, as he was released after the 2000 season, 2 years after he was drafted. After going 3-12 in his 2-season stint in Chicago, he ended up at the bottom of their depth chart and was ultimately traded to Miami. He never played it down after the 2000 season. Next up, the Dallas Cowboys' biggest draft bust was Rod Hill. Morris Claiborne? Sure, possibly. I get they traded up for him. But Rod Hill was far worse, because Claiborne was a disappointment. Rod Hill, which sounds like the nickname you give your pants while you have a boner, was taken 25th overall in the 1982 NFL Draft. He was an athletic freak who came out of Kentucky State University, but ultimately he became the embodiment of the phrase, hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard. The general consensus was that Rod Hill had a severe lack of mental fortitude. He alienated a lot of his teammates. Just nothing went right for Boner Mountain. In his 2 seasons with the Cowboys, he did not start a single game and picked off a mere 2 passes. In the 1982 NFC Championship game, he muffed a punt that gave Washington the ball at the Cowboys' 10-yard line early in the game. Washington would go on to win that game and eventually that year's Super Bowl. He was eventually traded to Buffalo after 2 years for late-round draft capital. He is not remembered fondly in Dallas. Next up, the Pittsburgh Steelers' worst draft bust, Dick Leftridge. There are other players I could have gone with here. Huey Richardson didn't work out, largely because of scheme fit and ineffective play. I will also likely get told that I should have said Kenny Pickett, largely because he's a guy that you remember. Now, a very close selection here was Gabe Rivera. I understand that he was drafted ahead of Dan Marino, and having Marino very likely would have given the Steelers a couple extra Super Bowls. And as a result of that decision to draft Rivera over Dan Marino, the Steelers didn't get a couple extra Super Bowls, meaning that story has a happy ending. Yeah! That's not to say I very nearly didn't choose Gabe Rivera because of those circumstances and because his career ended after a drunk driving accident where he was the drunk driver. However, I'm going to give the ever so slight edge to running back Dick Leftridge, who was taken 3rd overall in the 1966 NFL Draft. He came from West Virginia and played a major role in helping integrate their football team. Now, whether or not I can give him the nickname Running Backy Robinson, I am not sure. We will figure that out later. Despite being taken 3rd overall, the stud out of West Virginia played 4 career games and had career totals of 8 rushes, 17 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Nearly all of that production came in a blowout win over a terrible New York Giants team. To make matters worse, in his best career game, he was the 4th leading rusher on his own team. He was taken 2 spots before 6-time first-team All-Pro John Nyland, who could have played an instrumental role in delaying Terry Bradshaw's blatantly obvious CTE. Unfortunately, reports were that he struggled with focus and, more notably, he Eddie Lacy'd his way out of the NFL, as his weight reportedly ballooned from 230 pounds to 300 pounds. Dick Leftridge denies that it's that extreme. However, he did acknowledge that he could have been more disciplined in that regard, and Dick Leftridge retired after 1 season. And the final member of this tier, the Seattle Seahawks' biggest draft bust, was Dan McGuire. Dan McGuire was, of course, the younger brother of famed slugger Mark McGuire. Dan the Man is, to this day, the tallest quarterback in NFL history, at a staggering 6 feet 8 inches. He was beloved and coveted by the Seahawks front office, and at the time, the Seahawks needed a quarterback in the worst kind of way. At the behest of then-coach Chuck Knox, the Seahawks chose Dan McGuire over the player he wanted, Brett Favre in the first round of the 1991 NFL Draft. Nepotism will always exist in sports. If someone hears a familiar last name, they'll want that piece of greatness. It's like, look at me, I did 5 seconds of research. I saw a guy's height and last name and said, say no more, fam. Fun fact, first guy to ever say that. However, Mark McGwire was on roids in his heyday. No matter how you feel about the steroid era in baseball, greatness isn't always genetic, especially when that greatness is literally juicing. I also fully understand that steroids can't help you hit a baseball. Dan McGwire was 2-3 as the Seahawks' starter, and the games the Seahawks won with him as a starter were not because of him, but in spite of him. McGwire was benched at halftime in the first start of his rookie year after going 3 for 7 for 27 yards and an interception, and an abomination of a passer rating at 14.3. It was the only action he saw in his rookie year. He started 3 games in 1993, and the Seahawks never scored more than 16 points in any game that he started in that span. He was released after the 1994 season and never played in the league again after that. And sure, I could have gone with Aaron Curry, but the 2009 draft was a hot mess, despite the fact that the literal next player on this list comes from that draft. Leave me alone, I'm one guy. I also very much could have gone with Rick Mirer, but at least Rick Mirer won a Rookie of the Year award and had a starting tenure. Dan McGwire, on the other hand, was hot ass and far worse. You know a QB class is bad when you make me unironically say you could have had Brett Favre. Gunslinger. We are moving on to Tier 4. This tier is aptly named Bad Then, Worse Now. Starting with the Buffalo Bills' biggest draft bust, Aaron Maben. I very much could have put Tom Cousineau on this list, largely because he was a first overall pick who never played a down for the Bills. That said, Papa has an out here because his rights were eventually traded to the Cleveland Browns for a first-round draft pick, and that first-round draft pick became Jim Kelly. So not all was lost. Aaron Maben, on the other hand, was taken 11th overall in the 2009 draft and was a damned if you do, damned if you don't player in terms of athletic ability. And it's a shame considering the next 2 linebackers taken off the board were both Pro Bowlers named Brian. If they had chosen either Brian, they would have been much better off. I mean, hell, even Clay Matthews was still there. And Clay Matthews looks like what every Bills fan with long hair thinks they look like. Now, the big knock on Maben coming out of college was his lack of size. He had an explosive first step, but he didn't have the size to deal with NFL-level offensive linemen. Once he did gain that size, he lost the explosiveness that made him elite in college. Aaron Maben had 6 career sacks, exactly 0 of which came with the Bills. He had a brief resurgence with the Jets in 2011, which is a sentence I can't believe I just said, and his NFL career was over after 4 years. The next team on this list, the Minnesota Vikings' worst draft bust, was Troy Williamson. I think I speak for all Vikings fans when I say they would much rather have a wide receiver who pretended to moon a crowd after a touchdown than a wide receiver who couldn't stop dropping passes, making touchdowns impossible to begin with. Randy Moss was traded in the 2005 offseason after a highly productive yet majorly controversial 7-year stint in Minnesota. Why exactly was he dealt? Nobody knows except the people upstairs for the Vikings. Was it the outgoing owner's desire to leave the next owner without Randy Moss's antics? Did they want to be more balanced on offense? Did they want players who would pay fines with a check instead of straight cash, homie? Nobody knows. Now, Randy Moss was dealt to the Raiders in exchange for linebacker Napoleon Harris and a 1st and 7th round pick in the 2005 NFL Draft. Napoleon Harris was fine. Adrian Ward, who they spent their 7th round pick on, never played a down in the league. But we're here to talk about Troy Williamson, aren't we? Troy Williamson was the 7th overall pick in 2005, who was instantly tagged as the Randy Moss replacement, which is an awful lot of pressure to put on a 22-year-old kid. It's like, hey, you know how our fans are pissed that we traded away one of the greatest receivers to ever play the game? Well, you're his replacement. Here is an accurate representation of Troy Williamson filling Randy Moss's shoes. Thank you for your time. Randy Moss was so good that the term mossed is basically the cornerback's equivalent of being posterized. Elsewhere, when a receiver drops a pass, we say that quarterback got Williamsoned. He was just not good at all. In 3 seasons in Minnesota, he caught a mere 79 passes for 1,057 yards and 3 touchdowns. It's decent for 1 season, but not when you're the 7th overall pick and those stats are accumulated over 3 seasons. He was traded to Jacksonville in 2008 for a 6th-round draft pick, which became Jamar Johnson, who had 1 career catch. Troy Williamson was later quoted as saying he'd want to duke it out on the 50-yard line with Vikings coach Brad Childress after he fined him for attending his grandmother's funeral. Childress then did the right thing and honored Troy Williamson's career by dropping the fine. And this will be the 3rd time I use this joke in a video because I stand by it so much. If the Oakland Raiders, or the Las Vegas Raiders, have anything to do with the 1st-round pick, it's going to be used on a speedy receiver who sucks. Now, there were some people who told me about Demetrius Underwood, and based on the circumstances, I can't really put him on this list. I'm aware that he walked out after literally 1 day of practice, but that dude had unreal mental health issues. He dealt with a horrific case of bipolar disorder that ultimately derailed his NFL career. He is technically a draft bust, but putting him on this list just doesn't feel right. And the final player in this tier, the New York Giants' biggest draft bust, was Joe Don Looney, not to be confused with the Rascal Flatts guitarist. Teams have a really weird knack for betting on a player's talent even though their red flags are gigantic. Now, before you rush to the comments with what about Kadarius Toney or Daniel Jones or Eric Flowers or Evan Neal or Cedric Jones, Joe Don Looney has a wild story. As a college athlete, Joe Don Looney was an impeccable athlete and a physical freak. He also burned every bridge he crossed. He dropped out of the University of Texas in 1960 after his report card had 4 Fs and 1 D. To make matters worse, the D on his report card was actually the penis that he drew on it. He was kicked off of multiple college teams to the point that he was forced to play for Division II Oklahoma school Cameron University, go Aggies, where he kicked ass and took names. He then transferred to Oklahoma in 1962, where he was an All-American, but then he was kicked off of the team the very next year. The claim was that JD Legend punched an assistant coach, though that coach later refuted that claim. There were attitude problems, suspensions, expulsions, behavioral issues, teams he was kicked off of, but none of that stopped the Giants from taking him 12th overall in the 1964 NFL Draft. They were sold on his physical talent and their belief that I can fix him. Turns out the player who was once deemed the most uncoachable player in NFL history couldn't be fixed. He accumulated numerous fines when he got to the Giants for, among other things, not following the Giants' dress code, ignoring the press, and even not showing up for practice at times. After 25 days, which is funnier than 24 days, he was eventually traded to the Baltimore Colts. While in Baltimore, he was arguing about politics with a couple, which was normal enough, until he had the bright idea to break into their apartment with a friend and attack them later that night. He was then traded to Detroit, where he had the best years of his career, which isn't saying much. While he was with the Lions, he had an infamous moment with then head coach Harry Gilmer, where he was asked to deliver a play to the quarterback, and he was quoted as saying, "If you want a messenger boy, call Western Union." That move did not earn Matthew Judon any goodwill with the Lions. But on the bright side, that was a way smarter idea than breaking into Harry Gilmer's apartment and beating his ass later that night. He was then traded to Washington, where his NFL career fizzled out, and he was then called into Vietnam, and then he became a drug mule and got super into yoga. He died in a motorcycle crash at the age of 45. Now, before I continue with the last half of the tiers, if you like what we've seen so far, click the like button and subscribe to the channel. We have a blast. We're doing season previews soon. We're doing some more evergreen content before the league year starts. I'm psyched. Appreciate you guys for subscribing. Y'all are the best. But for now, back to the video. Moving on to tier number 5, which I have deemed, holy f***, you traded up for that guy? Starting with the Denver Broncos' biggest draft bust, Paxton Lynch. If there's one thing John Elway can't get enough of, it's tall, bland quarterbacks. Paxton Lynch was exactly that. He was 6'7". He was tall, he was 245 pounds, and he had a cannon for an arm. That's all John Elway needed to hear. He moved up 4 spots in the first round of the 2016 NFL Draft and gave Seattle their first and third round picks in exchange for Paxton Lynch. To make matters worse, the pick was announced by a Make-A-Wish kid. You gave that kid Paxton Lynch? At least do what the Knicks did with that singer who sang the national anthem during the Trump booing fest and invite him back. Give the guy another chance. Paxton Lynch was horrifically mediocre when he played for the Broncos, as he only started 4 games in his 2 seasons in Denver. He was an extremely raw, unpolished prospect, but he could never vault himself to the top of the depth chart on a consistent basis. Especially sucks considering his competition was Trevor Siemian. That's the NFL equivalent of not being able to get past level 2 of a video game. Paxton Lynch was released after only 2 seasons in Denver and has not played in an NFL game since. But he's bounced around leagues. He's played in the USFL, the XFL, and he even returned to Denver to play for their indoor football team, the Colorado Spartans. He struggled at every level of football, and he is no doubt the Broncos' biggest draft bust. Let it be a cautionary tale. If someone compares a quarterback to Blake Bortles, look the other way. Next up, the Miami Dolphins' biggest draft bust, Dion Jordan. The 2013 NFL Draft was hot ass. Perhaps the most costly of these selections was Dion Jordan, who the Dolphins traded up to 3rd overall in the 2013 NFL Draft to get. The Dolphins were enamored by his physical skill set. The only problem was that NFL tackles know how to handle guys like that. Physical traits can only get you so far. The biggest knock on Dion Jordan was that he lacked the technique that he didn't need to develop in college because of his physical skill set. Those flaws in Jordan's game were immediately exposed upon him arriving in the NFL, as he started a mere 1 game with Miami in the 3 years that he was there, while logging a mere 3 sacks. He dealt with multiple PED suspensions and declining performance, which culminated with him being suspended for the entire 2015 season. He was reinstated in 2016 by the NFL, though that season he didn't play a single down for the Dolphins. He was let go in March of 2017 after failing a physical. Next up, the San Francisco 49ers' biggest draft bust, Trey Lance. Shockingly, Trey Lance is the only 2021 draftee on this list. That was a draft full of organization-defining busts and future Hall of Famers. I said what I said. The biggest reason he's a shoo-in for this list is because the 49ers gave the Dolphins their 2021 first-round draft pick, in addition to 2 future first-round draft picks to move up to the 3rd overall selection in the 2021 NFL Draft. Trey Lance had all of the traits, but he was only a 1-year starter at North Dakota State. And that wasn't even the season before he joined the NFL. That season was in 2019, which, to his credit, he put up an astonishing TD to interception ratio of 28-0. That said, spending essentially 3 first-round draft picks on a guy who started 17 games in college was a monumental risk that ultimately didn't pay off. Once he got to the pros, he did deal with some injuries and the emergence of Brock Purdy. I understand I'm avoiding injury busts, but they gave up a lot. In particular, he suffered an ankle injury in the 2022 season that ended that year for him and hampered his development. Brock Purdy then came in and performed to the point that he was the perfect cog in Kyle Shanahan's system. So basically, Trey Lance was a bust because of a sandwich of injuries, a lack of development, and Brock Purdy taking the starting job and not letting go. Now, the biggest reason I have him in this tier and not a tier higher was because of the injuries. And because if Brock Purdy hadn't emerged, Trey Lance would have likely got a ton more chances. We don't really know what Trey Lance's full potential would have been. Lance was eventually traded to the Cowboys for a 4th-round draft pick that the 49ers used on Malik Mustafa, who is a good player. That said, is Malik Mustafa worth 3 first-round picks? I'm gonna say no. Moving on to tier number 6. Which I have aptly named Kick and Keel. These are for teams who spend high draft capital on a kicker who got the yips once they reached the pros, hence the name Kick and Keel. Starting off with the Arizona Cardinals' worst draft bust, Steve Little. The popular choices here are Matt Leinart and Josh Rosen, who are commonly thought of as the biggest draft busts in Cardinals history because they are guys who you remember. However, a guy that usurps both of them was a kicker who was taken in the middle of the first round. Steve Little, who was named after his chances of making a kick longer than 30 yards, was taken 15th overall in the 1978 NFL Draft. Once he reached the pros, his ceiling was being an average NFL punter. When he had the starting gig as the Cardinals kicker, he was truly terrible. He was 5 for 14 from beyond 30 yards and only made 75% of his PATs in his first year in that role. In his second year, he only made 3 out of 8 field goals altogether, even though he only missed 2 PATs. However, he would be released only 6 games into his 3rd season in the league after a rough performance against the Rams, where he missed both field goal attempts and one of his 2 extra point tries. Hours after being released by the team in 1980, he was paralyzed from the neck down in a single car accident. He sadly lived in a wheelchair until his 1999 passing at the age of 43. Next up, the New Orleans Saints' biggest draft bust was Russell Erxleben. That's correct. The Saints used an 11th overall pick on a kicker/punter. He was nicknamed Thunderfoot after the fact that a kicker being drafted that high was as shocking as it was. He actually once held the NCAA record for the longest field goal of 66. It was a really long field goal, but that was on a tee. He was also a rock-solid punter in college, so much so that the Saints, who had despondent kicking issues at the time, took him ahead of legends like Kellen Winslow, Mark Gastineau, and some quarterback named Joe Montana. No relation to Hannah, by the way. I did check. And things started off horrible, actually. In typical Aints fashion, his first game as a Saint involved a snap going over his head and him chest passing it directly to the Atlanta Falcons, who ran it in for a walk-off pick 6. I couldn't find a video of the play, but if someone tells me the Saints made a horrible play in the 70s, I kinda tend to take their word for it. He was such a mediocre kicker in the NFL that he only had 8 career field goal attempts, the longest make of which was from 38 yards. He struggled with accuracy and missed deeply important kicks. And as a result, he was relegated to punter, where he was fine. A decent punter is not worth an 11th overall draft pick though, and he was out of the NFL after only 5 seasons. The worst part is, that's not even where this story ends. He served 2 different prison sentences for multiple incidents of fraud that I am way too poor to understand. Securities fraud, mail fraud, money laundering, and a Ponzi scheme, which all sound like spaces on a Wall Street bingo board, ultimately did him in as a businessman. It was a disappointing ending for a guy who is widely regarded as the most hated man in Saints history, which is genuinely more impressive than anything. And the final member of this tier, the Tampa Bay Bucks' biggest draft bust, was Roberto Aguayo. I know Bo Jackson exists. I know he was taken 1st overall in 1986, and I know he didn't play it down for the Bucks. That said, Bo Jackson refused to play for the Bucks, and the Bucks selected him anyway. That doesn't make Bo Jackson a draft bust. That just makes the Bucks idiots. Roberto Aguayo, meanwhile, was one of the greatest kickers in college football history. He even won the Lou Groza Award once and was a 2-time first-team All-American. What makes this the Bucks' biggest draft bust was the especially rare circumstances behind this selection. The Bucks traded a 3rd-round pick and a 4th-round pick to acquire the services of a kicker, and my guy just straight up got the yips. Roberto Aguayo went 22 for 31 in field goals in his lone season with Tampa Bay, but that hardly tells the whole story. From under 39 yards, he was 18 for 20. From longer than 40 yards, he was 4 for 11. From longer than 45 yards, he was 0 for 6. What likely sealed his fate was a Week 17 game against Carolina, where he missed 2 field goals, one of which was blocked. He was released in 2017 after struggling in that preseason and losing the job to Nick Folk. After a storied college career, his NFL career only lasted 1 season, which is why, as a Bengals fan, anytime the Bengals hype up Evan McPherson by saying, "That's why you draft a kicker," I want to punch them in the mouth. Roberto Aguayo is a cautionary tale. Drafting a kicker that high, especially in a draft where he was the only kicker selected, is not the brightest of ideas. Roberto Aguayo did become a father in 2025, proving he could still occasionally put balls through the uprights. The second to last tier is tier number 7, aptly named really unfortunate. Kind of bummers of stories. Starting off with the Carolina Panthers' biggest draft bust, Ray Caruth. Things didn't start out horribly for Ray Caruth. They absolutely, however, as a lot of people may well know, they couldn't have ended worse. Ray Caruth was a late first-round draft pick in 1997 out of the University of Colorado. Ray Caruth's career started out okay, as he had 44 receptions for 545 yards and 4 touchdowns. It was enough for him to be named to the all-rookie team, but it was not a particularly strong wide receiver class. Only 1 Pro Bowler came from this class, and it was Derek Mason, who was selected 3 rounds after Ray Ray Caruth. 1998 was when it all began to fall apart, as that year he played in 2 games and caught a mere 4 passes. In 1999, he played in the first 5 games of that season, and he caught a mere 14 passes for 200 yards before suffering an ankle injury that sidelined him for several weeks. And then everything came crashing down when Ray Caruth made the life-ruining decision to channel his inner as I lay dying and hiring a hitman to murder his pregnant girlfriend, Sharika Adams. She was ambushed while she was driving, and the hitman shot her. She survived for nearly a month before she passed away, and the baby, Chancellor Lee Adams, was delivered via emergency C-section. After promising to turn himself in if either Sharika or Chancellor died, Sharika passed away, and Caruth fled the state. Ray Caruth's life as a free man, which once featured him making exciting plays under bright lights, ended in a Best Western parking lot in the trunk of a gray Toyota Camry surrounded by bottles of his own piss. He did this because he didn't want to pay child support for another child, which, what a guy. Ray Caruth was ultimately found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder, among other charges, and was sentenced to 18 years and 11 months to 24 years and 4 months in prison. He spent nearly 18 years in prison before being released in October of 2018. He now lives under a different name entirely. Now, the only saving grace of this story is Ray Caruth's son. He may live with cerebral palsy, but he's also the happiest dude. He's graduated high school. He has a $1 trillion smile. He rides horses all the time. I'm allergic and jealous. And best of all, he's universally loved by everyone around him. Not to mention, he regularly attends Panthers games and gets the star treatment every time he does that, which is an experience that Ray Caruth will never get to have again. Next up, the Detroit Lions' worst draft bust, Reggie Rogers. There are a lot of people you can make a case for here. Charles Rogers, Mike Williams, Joey Harrington, Andre Ware, and as of a week ago, before I had time to write anything about this, Terrion Arnold. The Lions have a long and storied history of their draft picks not panning out, but Reggie Rogers' flame out ultimately takes the cake. Now, before I go any further, it's worth noting that Reggie Rogers' older brother Don was taken in the first round of the 1985 NFL Draft by the Cleveland Browns. He was a 2-year starter in Cleveland before he ultimately died of a cocaine overdose nearly 8 days after NBA draftee Len Bias died of a cocaine overdose. How his brother's passing affected Reggie going forward, I have no idea. Reggie Rogers was taken 7th overall in 1987, 3 picks ahead of future Hall of Famer Rod Woodson. Despite the fact that he was truly an enormous talent, he got very, very little playing time in his 2 seasons in Detroit and only logged a single sack in his 2 seasons there. His mental and emotional issues caused him to miss a good chunk of his rookie year, and things didn't get much better from there. In the middle of the 1988 season, he committed a DUI manslaughter where 3 teenagers lost their lives, and Rogers suffered a broken neck that sidelined him through the 1988 season. He was released soon after, not because of the fact that he killed people, but because he got hurt. After spending an "are you kidding me" amount of time in prison, he tried to make comebacks with the Bills and Buccaneers, both comeback attempts of which were short-lived and disappointing. After playing his final down of pro football, he moved back to Washington, where he became an all-time great in DUIs. After his, I am not making this number up, 6th DUI in Washington state, he begged a judge for leniency by telling him how good he used to be at football. And no, I'm not kidding.
Stand on my back like you did when I was playing college football and basketball, when I carried this whole team, this whole state on my back to the promised land.
He passed away in 2013. Next up, the Jacksonville Jaguars' worst draft bust was Justin Blackmon. There are a handful of people I could put up here. One that comes to mind is RJ Soward. He dealt with numerous addiction issues and only logged 14 catches, despite being a first-round pick. You could also think of Blaine Gabbert or Blake Bortles, who both ended up being major disappointments. Not to mention Dante Fowler, whose development was hampered by an ACL tear before his rookie year started, and he later on became a serviceable serviceable starter on a bunch of teams. However, I'm going to go with Justin Blackmon, who was taken 5th overall in the 2012 NFL Draft. He accomplished things in Jacksonville. He absolutely had glimpses of potential that were extremely visible during his time in Jacksonville. He made the Pro Football Writers Association's all-rookie team after notching 62 catches for 865 yards and 5 touchdowns in his rookie year. Unfortunately, the addiction issues that I've read about all too much as I was writing this video did not stop with Blackmon, as his problems with drugs and alcohol derailed what could have been an incredible career in the pros. He had multiple DUIs, he violated the league's substance abuse policy in 2013, and he was arrested for possession of marijuana in July of 2014. He did not play a down of football after his suspension following Week 8 in 2013. It was an awful tale of what could have been, as Blackmon had all the ability and every physical tool anyone could ask for. I know I feel like I'm contradicting myself with this entry. I'm just sitting here like, man, that guy could have been so f***ing good. People at Oklahoma State consider it a privilege to have been able to watch him. He was just that talented. Next up, the Rams' biggest draft bust was Lawrence Phillips. I very much could have gone with the 2 offensive tackles taken 2nd overall that a lot of people think of as the biggest draft bust for the Rams. Instead, I went with an all-time bust, Lawrence Phillips. Lawrence Phillips was basically on the what could have been Mount Rushmore. Watching his highlight reel in college genuinely felt like watching Adrian Peterson. At his peak, he was an unstoppable player with about as good of home run speed as anyone had in the second level of the field. The hype was extremely real. That said, he had massive legal issues at Nebraska, particularly with beating the absolute dog piss out of his then girlfriend and grabbing onto the neck of a 21-year-old student. Worst of all, he accepted a $100 dinner from a sports agent. That's where the NCAA's priorities were in terms of eligibility. Savage assault after savage assault, but what's that? Ruth's Chris Steakhouse? Buddy, no, we're disappointed. We gotta talk. Lawrence Phillips was taken 6th overall in a loaded 1996 NFL draft class, and the Rams felt comfortable enough trading Jerome Bettis to Pittsburgh to acquire Phillips in that draft. He had all the potential in the world to be quite literally one of the greatest running backs ever. As an elusive running back, he was able to get out of everyone's way except his own. He collapsed at multiple practices due to still having alcohol in his system. He had severe anger, attitude, and addiction issues that ultimately derailed his NFL career. Despite being given numerous chances, his inability to stay out of trouble cost him his job with the Rams. He was released just 19 months after being taken 6th overall. He bounced around football until the 2000s, where his severe legal issues caused him to spend the rest of his life in prison. He murdered his cellmate in April of 2015 and took his own life exactly 9 months later. It's truly a horrifying and sad career. One of the most promising college players ever has his mugshot as his legacy. And the final member of this tier, the Philadelphia Eagles' worst draft bust, was Kevin Allen. Kevin Allen was a physical freak of a left tackle whose potential the Philadelphia Eagles really believed in. They took him 9th overall in the 1985 NFL Draft, which sucks considering 5 of the next 7 picks were Pro Bowlers, including, yes, this guy. Kevin Allen was a jaw-dropping combination of bad player, bad person. Kevin Allen spent 4 games as a regular lineman for the Eagles before he was demoted to special teams after quarterbacks Ron Jaworski and rookie Randall Cunningham took a combined 24 sacks over their first 4 games of the season. After Kevin Allen was demoted to special teams, Ron Jaworski never took more than 4 sacks in a game that season. In 1986, things somehow got worse. The Eagles hired Buddy Ryan as their next head coach, who had exactly 0 patience for Kevin Allen. Buddy Ryan called him non-existent on the practice field. When Allen was hospitalized for dehydration, Buddy Ryan showed all the concern in the world by saying, "You mean the general? You know we all call him the general, don't you? For General Hospital?" That is apathy. Kevin Allen later tested positive for cocaine and was unceremoniously released. Days after being cut, Kevin Allen and his roommate were charged with sexual assault and was sentenced to 15 years in prison, of which he served 33 months. As a result of his multiple transgressions, he was banned for life from the NFL. Though the ban was later lifted, Kevin Allen never played another down in the NFL, and his NFL career consisted of exactly 4 starts. Jerry Rice, meanwhile, had 2.5 times as many first-team All-Pro selections. And the final tier in this video, the highest tier, can only be topped by a literal serial killer. These are for the all-time busts. Starting with my beloved Cincinnati Bengals, whose biggest NFL draft bust is Akili Smith. Where do I begin, fellas? Do I begin talking about the numerous honorable mentions? David Klingler, John Ross, maybe Greg Cook or Kijana Carter if you're mad that I'm not including injury busts. But this is my team and I'm calling the shots here. Akili Smith is the outright winner. So a little background. I started watching the Bengals in 2003, which was Marvin Lewis's first season coaching the team. Prior to that, I was semi-aware of the Cincinnati Bengals and how horrifically and tragically they sucked balls. Anytime I heard the name Akili Smith prior to that, it never had a good connotation to it. If you said the name Akili Smith 3 times, a Bengals fan with a paper bag over his head would have shown up out of nowhere like he's Beetlejuice. Akili Smith was taken 3rd overall in the 1999 NFL Draft, just after Tim Couch, who won't be on this list, and Donovan McNabb. Smith had major upside and was a really strong athlete, but he was largely unproven as he was only super successful for a single season at Oregon. That season, albeit was pretty damn good though, as he was the Pac-10 Co-Offensive Player of the Year. And it was a disaster. It started with a contract holdout, and draft busts and contract holdouts go together like shredded cheese and Cincinnati chili. Screw you, it's delicious. Akili Smith would start 17 games for the Bengals, only 3 of which he won. He threw 5 touchdowns in his entire career to go alongside 13 interceptions. Here's the funny part to me. 2 of those wins and 3 of those touchdowns came against the Cleveland Browns. Now here's what isn't funny to me. The Saints that year wanted to move up to the 3rd overall pick, which the Bengals had, to select Ricky Williams, but the Bengals said, no, we are sold on Akili damn Smith. Well, either that or they didn't want to pay scouts to have to look at extra players. The Bengals believed that Akili Smith would be their next beacon of stability at quarterback. Instead, he would forever be tied to the Bungles era. I would call it the Bengals era, but those are the names of the Bengals cheerleaders. And no old man has ever taken a video of a Bengals loss and jacked off to it later. Don't get mad at that joke. I've watched it happen multiple times. Don't believe me?
Let's hear it one more time for the Bengals.
Got his ass. Akili Smith reportedly lacked diligence when it came to film and playbook study habits. All of that led to his release in 2003, which was the year the Bengals took another Pac-10 quarterback, Carson Palmer, 1st overall. Next up, the Atlanta Falcons' biggest draft bust, Bruce Pickens. Like the Cleveland Browns, the Falcons have a lot of players I could have chosen. Andre Bruce, who was selected number 1 overall in 1988, and he wasn't great, but he was okay. Jamal Anderson, Perry Ajeri, or Tack McKinley to appease the recency bias commenters. However, Bruce Pickens, who was taken 3rd overall in 1991, has to take the cake. He was selected that high because of speed, and, well, actually that's about it. He was an athletic freak at Nebraska, but nothing about his NFL career was good any way, shape, or form. He started off getting sued for breach of contract by his former agency after trying to hire a different agent, and also threatened to sue the Falcons for drafting him while he was on their roster. He was also charged with sexual assault, though those charges were later dropped. On the field, he was a disaster, as he only made 8 starts and picked off a mere 2 passes, both of which were in 1992 and neither of which were in wins. He was traded midway through the 1993 season, along with an ancient Eric Dickerson in exchange for running back John Stevens. It ended a brutal tenure with the Falcons. Next up, the Indianapolis Colts. Their biggest draft bust was a highly touted quarterback who was selected 4th overall. Nope, not him. There we go. If you want to talk about a guy who couldn't lay off the sauce, I'm sorry, I misspoke. If you want to talk about a guy who couldn't lay off the odds, Art Schlichter had a decorated career at Ohio State that included 3 top 6 Heisman voting finishes. His career at Ohio State was not too shabby, but unfortunately that's where the gambling problems that ultimately defined his legacy began. Those gambling concerns did not stop the Colts from not only taking him 4th overall in the 1982 NFL Draft, but trading away 1976 NFL MVP Burt Jones to get that draft spot. If they had taken Jim McMahon, who was taken 1 spot later, things could have been okay. They just weren't. He showed up to training camp out of shape and out of focus in his rookie year. He blew his entire signing bonus on, get this, gambling! And he ultimately lost the starting job, which was his to lose, to 1982 4th round pick Mike Pagel. He just continued to gamble to the point that he racked up severe debt and was suspended for all of the 1983 season. Now, mind you, 1983 was the year that John Elway adamantly refused to be drafted by the Colts, who had the 1st overall pick. What people often forget about that is the Colts took a quarterback 4th overall the year prior. Now, to Art Schlichter's credit, he did have a career TD to interception ratio in the pros of 105 touchdowns and 28 interceptions. The only problem was that those were his Arena League stats. Here were his NFL stats. 0-6 record, 3 touchdowns, 11 picks, a completion percentage in his career of 45%, and a passer rating of 42.6. To put that passer rating in perspective, an incomplete pass constitutes a 39.6 passer rating. He never played a down again in the NFL after 1985, and gambling continued to haunt his life. After retiring from football, he faced numerous legal issues that still haunt him to this day. As Father Rusty Schubert, diehard Ohio State fan, puts it, one of the saddest stories in sports history. And to those of you watching this, gamble for pizza money, not real money. Next up, Washington's biggest draft bust was Heath Shuler. North Carolina Congressman Heath Shuler. Heath Shuler was a 2-year starter at Tennessee and was named a 2nd-team All-American in his final season there. Scouts knew he was a bit of a project, but he had all the tools and traits that scouts blow their loads over. Washington took him 3rd overall in the 1994 NFL Draft, and Washington hoped he would develop into a franchise QB. What they got with that 3rd overall pick was merely a season and a half of play, 13 touchdowns to 19 interceptions, a 4-9 record as a starter, and a completion percentage of 48%. Now, a lot of these major draft busts have incredible falls from grace. Dramatic stories, arrests. Heath Shuler's big story was that he eventually lost his job to a 7th-round draft pick who was best known for bashing his head against a padded wall, and he was unceremoniously traded to the Saints in 1997. His career will be defined by disappointment, a stint in Congress, and a Dish Network commercial. The New York Jets' biggest draft bust, not a quarterback, it's Vernon Gholston. Here's how embarrassing the Jets' history is. Vernon Gholston was a defensive end selected 6th overall in the 2008 NFL Draft, and he had 0 sacks. And I was still like, did I pick the right guy? Stick to your guns, brother. Now, despite what people may say, I'm not putting a quarterback here for the Jets. The Jets ruin every quarterback they touch, and they will continue to ruin every quarterback they touch. Well, almost. Zach Wilson was a horrific disappointment, but he did occasionally have good moments, and he was a 3-year starter. Those good moments came in small spurts, but they did exist. Christian Hackenberg was a 2nd-round pick who never played it down in the pros. He had horrible accuracy issues, which proves that nobody leaves Penn State University with the good kind of touch. Sam Darnold saw ghosts and won a Super Bowl elsewhere. Geno Smith got punched in the jaw. Mark Sanchez rammed the asses of his own offensive lineman and a high schooler. Allegedly. James Morgan is a guy that I'm just now finding out exists. Let me put it bleakly. The 3 best quarterbacks the Jets have ever drafted were a guy who was drafted ahead of Dan Marino, a guy who was drafted ahead of Tom Brady, and arguably the most overrated athlete to ever live. Instead, let's go with the dude who was taken 6th overall as a defensive end and didn't have a single sack. I know sacks don't tell the whole story as a defensive lineman, but if you have 0 of them in your NFL career when you're taken 6th overall, they kinda can. Vernon Gholston was a weight room warrior. He was a physical specimen in Ohio State and had production at that college that justified being selected in the top 6. Unfortunately, he had 0 technique and never had to develop it due to his size, and professional offensive tackles know how to deal with exactly that kind of player because they have technique. He was basically the pass rushing equivalent of a pitcher that threw a 100-mile-an-hour fastball that only goes right down the middle. In 3 seasons, Vernon Gholston had 5 starts, 42 career tackles, 1 QB hit, and, like I've said ad nauseum, 0 sacks. He was off the team after 3 seasons. The Tennessee Titans' biggest draft bust? Isaiah Wilson. I knew Isaiah Wilson was a disaster. I knew he only played 4 snaps. I knew a bunch of other things that I'll expand on in a bit. All that said, when a former first-round pick is released after just his rookie year, that's a major red flag. I went down the Isaiah Wilson rabbit hole, and holy shit, he was drafted based on measurables and potential. He was 6'6", 350, and came from the University of Georgia. And that's approximately where his highlight reel ends. He attended a party at Tennessee State University, mind you during 2020, which was a violation of their no visitors policy. He attempted to evade police to the point that he nearly jumped off of a second-story balcony, which played well into the theme of him turning down an opportunity for physical activity. He had multiple, long stints on the COVID-19 list, which may have been the Titans' excuse to get him away from the roster. While on the COVID list, he was arrested for DUI while doing donuts in an intersection and crashing into a concrete wall. Even with starting tackle Taylor Lewan tearing his ACL in Week 6 of the 2020 season, Isaiah Wilson just did not see any playing time whatsoever. His NFL career consisted of 4 snaps, and those 4 snaps were 1 extra point attempt and 3 kneel downs. He was called lazy, a disaster, and useless, which are terms so insulting, I almost mistook them for my comments. Isaiah Wilson was deactivated for the 2020 season on December 7th for the remainder of the year. 2 months later, after John Robinson questioned his commitment to the team, he tweeted, "I'm done with football as a Titan. No further comment." And I guess they were both right. Isaiah Wilson was later traded to Miami for basically no draft capital, and he was released after 3 days. He was then on the practice squad for the Giants for a season before pursuing a rap career that went about as well as his NFL career did.
Since I came to the party sipping on a wine, and I came through, I had to on my job. Then I love my party in the club with a glove. Bad bitches see me and they start to fly. Yeah, and I'm sipping on my lean, bitch. Yeah, and my bitch is off the beam, bitch. Yeah, and you gotta do the team, bitch. Yeah, you gotta fuck. Is this?
You will be missed, Gigi Bowser. That's Giga Bowser! Motherfucker, I told you to get it together in the editing room. The Green Bay Packers' biggest draft bust is Tony Mandarich. The 1989 NFL Draft was a star-studded affair, and one of those stars was Michigan State offensive tackle Tony Mandarich. The guy they called the Incredible Bulk thought he was going to form an Avengers-like tandem with the rest of the guys he was being drafted alongside of. Instead, that draft became the Fantastic Four. That joke took way longer to write than I care to admit. Sports Illustrated even went as far as to call him the greatest offensive line prospect ever. The hype for Tony Mandarich was extremely real. His stellar 1988 season cemented his legacy as a top prospect. He had insane measurables. Scouts blew loads at what he was able to do to opposing defenders. He made defensive ends look like Make-A-Wish kids. Mandarich was taken 2nd overall in an unreal 1989 NFL draft that included Troy Aikman, Barry, and Deion Sanders, the late Derek Thomas, Steve Atwater, and Mandarich's Michigan State teammate, Andre Rison. Why did Tony Mandarich have those insane measurables and highlights? Steroids and HGH. The guy I'm calling Jose Panqueco had very obvious warning signs of steroid use, which he fully admitted to in 2008. He had a ton of acne, erratic changes in behavior, and a suspiciously small jockstrap. However, once he got to the pros, he stopped using steroids where he really should have kept using them. His play was dreadful, and defensive ends threw Mandarich around constantly. His nickname was The Terrible, and the amount amount of jokes I'd have about that nickname would make this video last another 2 hours. After 3 seasons of disappointing play and numerous issues of skipping practice, the Packers made the tough but correct decision to move on from Tony Mandarich. He did play 3 serviceable seasons for the Colts later down the road, but retired after the 1989 season due to a shoulder injury. The Chargers' worst draft bust. Come on. It's Ryan Leaf. There was once a very real debate about whether Peyton Manning or Ryan Leaf should go first overall in the 1998 NFL Draft. Peyton Manning was more competitive. Ryan Leaf had better arm strength. Manning was smarter. Leaf never stuck his balls in a trainer's face. Allegedly. Talent is hard to deny. That's just a fact about the NFL. The talent Ryan Leaf displayed at Washington State was undeniable. The QB debate from the 1998 NFL Draft was highly contentious. Manning was viewed as the safer quarterback and the more pro-ready quarterback, but Ryan Leaf was viewed as the quarterback with the higher ceiling. The Chargers traded a boatload of draft capital and 2 players to move up to 2nd overall in the 1998 NFL Draft to select the quarterback that the Colts ended up not choosing. The Colts got Manning, and the Chargers got f***ed. Ryan Leaf's Chargers tenure started okay as he won his first 2 games in his rookie season. And then a rainy Week 3 game in Kansas City happened. On that day, Ryan Leaf went 1 for 15 with 4 passing yards, which reminds me. Be right back. Here are 5 pathetic stats from Week 3 of the 1998 NFL season. Number 1, Ryan Leaf had fewer passing yards against the Chiefs than he had turnovers committed. Number 2, Ryan Leaf had fewer passing yards against the Chiefs in Week 3 than Peyton Manning had career MVPs and first-team All-Pro selections. Number 3, Ryan Leaf had fewer completions against the Chiefs in Week 3 than Peyton Manning had career Super Bowl wins and career teams that retired his jersey number. Number 4, Ryan Leaf had as many completions in Week 3 against the Chiefs as Eli Manning had career 99-yard completions. Number 5, Ryan Leaf had exactly half as many passing yards as Junior Seau had solo tackles that week. Great job, Alex. Got your back, dog. Infamously after that game, he screamed at reporter Jay Posner by telling him to knock it off and calling him a name that would get me demonetized. He had to be separated from that reporter by his teammates and thus began his downfall. After that incident, he gave a half-assed apology that is honestly an insult to half-asses everywhere. To show how tough his rookie season was, that gruesome stat line from Week 3 was nearly identical to his touchdown to interception ratio of that season. Things didn't get any better in the next year, as in 1999, he didn't play at all due to a shoulder injury. He did improve statistically by clearing the lowest of bars, but the Chargers went 1-8 in his starting tenure that season, and they went 1-15 overall. He had a TD to interception ratio of 11-18 and was released after only 3 years on the team. So what the happened? Ryan Leaf admitted he was ill-prepared for the NFL. All he knew was dominating the sport of football. He was a star athlete from a small town with a mega cannon for an arm. He was the his entire life and was treated as exactly that. He reportedly faked wrist injuries to play golf, a sport in which I'm pretty sure you need your wrists to play. Ryan Leaf also partied in Vegas a lot, which brings me to a side point. There is a major difference between a quarterback living the celebrity lifestyle and a quarterback living the celebrity party lifestyle. If you see Joe Burrow going to a fashion show in Milan in peak off season when nothing's happening, who cares? That's not him being distracted from his job. That's him enjoying his time off. Nobody sees Jessica Alba at a fashion show and is worried that her movies are going to be any worse. That said, the moment you're downing shots of vodka with Drake in Vegas in your bye week and flirting with any 17-year-old with a pulse, that's when people should get concerned. Basically, for his entire life, he thought he was the until he burned every bridge and stole every bottle of Vicodin within a 50-mile radius of the greater San Diego area. After stints with the Bucs, Cowboys, and Seahawks, he abruptly retired before the 2002 season began. 4 years, a 4-17 record as a starter in the NFL, and wasted talent. He spent time in prison due to his drug habit, but he now works in sports media and by all accounts has turned everything around. Good job, bud. The Raiders' biggest draft bust, Darrius Heyward-Bey. Stephen A. Smith did not mince words when it came to the Raiders' biggest draft bust. Let's take a listen.
You say that? I am a person that believes in second chances. I think America is the land of second chances, except for when it comes to this dude, Mr. Jabba the Hutt, you fat, slovenly, no good, lazy.
No, wait, Darrius Heyward-Bey wasn't a fat slob. He was a speedy yet disappointing wide receiver. Why would Stephen A. Smith say that about Dario? That's right. The George Washington on the Mount Rushmore of NFL draft busts. He was taken first overall in 2007 because he was the only player that made Al Davis's work properly. Then head coach Lane Kiffin adamantly did not want to draft Jamarcus Russell. They could have had Calvin Johnson. Hell, even Joe Thomas could have been an apt number 1 pick. However, the Raiders passed on 2 Hall of Famers for a guy who could throw 70 yards from his knees. Jamarcus Russell had all the tools and accolades to succeed. He had size. He had one of the strongest arms the NFL draft has ever seen. He was yet another football prodigy who would have been impossible to pass up at number 1 overall, especially when you have an old rich guy who watched 1 college football game. After being taken with the first pick, Russell proceeded to hold out until week 1 of the 2007 season when he signed a massive 6-year, $68 million rookie deal with $31 million guaranteed. Statistically, he was extremely disappointing. He had 18 career touchdown passes, 23 interceptions, a career completion percentage of 52.1, and a career passer rating of, oh my god. There is a highlight reel of every touchdown Jamarcus Russell threw in the NFL, and it's under 5 minutes long. Why did he fail? His work ethic. He didn't accumulate gaudy stats, but he did get fat as Jamarcus Russell's weight and lack of film study were very apparent. His weight reportedly ballooned to 290 pounds prior to the 2009 season. The Raiders were so unconvinced that he was watching film that they sent him home with a blank DVD just to prove to the organization that he was not watching film. The next day, they quizzed him about the film, and he said it looked good to him. That's when the Raiders knew they had him caught red-handed, either because he had lied about watching film or because his hand had ketchup on it. He was so distracted during a pre-draft interview with then Lions GM Matt Millen that Matt Millen advised Al Davis not to draft him. You know you have issues if GM Matt Millen is the voice of reason. On the Pivot podcast, he even admitted that he wasn't a guy who watched film a bunch. He just believed too much in his own skill set. He was quoted as saying, "I make plays, bro."
I go out there and play football, bro. Make plays, bro.
Which reminds me, here's a Yeah Glow remix I made with that Jamarcus Russell interview that I really hope doesn't get me demonetized.
Plays, bro.
Dump a little pussy hoe with some shell toes.
Plays, bro.
Rapping rap bitches and making bail hoe.
Plays, bro.
Two-tone Cartier match the nails hoe.
Plays, bro.
No competition, these bitches stale hoe.
I am way too proud of that. After a dismal 2009 season where he had 3 times as many starts as he had touchdown passes, he was released from the Raiders. He penned a lengthy Players Tribune article called "Y'all Don't Know a Damn Thing About Jamarcus Russell" that chronicled his upbringing, his football successes and failures, and him taking accountability for his shortcomings for about 6 sentences. But there's one team remaining, and this team has had so many draft busts, I named co-winners. What's that noise? Where is it? What's happening? What's happening to my face? Come on, stop! Stop! Yeah, you know what? This was earned. So here we go, folks. Picking the Browns' biggest draft bust is a lot like Thanksgiving. You have so many options to choose from, but no matter what you do, there's gonna be an argument. There are people who will argue that Tim Couch was the biggest bust because he was a quarterback selected number 1 overall. Y'all, the Browns are a dumpster fire organization. I stand by it. And they made a 21-year-old rookie the leader of their organization without giving him a semblance of an offensive line. Calling him a bust for that sucks, especially considering Tim Couch took them to the playoffs. There are a lot of players I could choose from. Corey Coleman, Jedrick Wills, Deshaun Kaiser, Trent Richardson, maybe. But they got a first-round pick out of it a year later, even though that first-round pick turned into our co-winner. We'll get to that. But when you draft 2 epic busts from a draft full of Hall of Famers, yikes. Which is why I'm naming 2 winners for the biggest draft bust in Cleveland Browns history, because they were 2 first-round picks that came from the same class, Justin Gilbert and Johnny Manziel. Johnny Manziel is definitely an all-time Browns draft bust. A lot of teams had him off their boards entirely, but all it takes is one team to fall in love with a guy. His talent and highlights were undeniable, but that said, many teams had him off their draft boards altogether. Many teams reportedly considered him undraftable because of his arrogance and because he couldn't stop partying with Drake. The Browns, and Jerry Jones actually, loved him. A lot of teams didn't want to draft him though, and the Browns very quickly figured out why. Johnny Manziel underwhelmed in his starting stint with the Browns. He had an even 7-7 touchdown to interception ratio, he never had a season with above a 60% completion percentage, and he was demoted to third string after being videotaped partying in Austin, Texas during the bye week. Johnny Manziel told then head coach Mike Pettin that he wasn't partying in Austin, which, come on. Austin, Texas is where you go to party, get drunk, and say the N-word on Kill Tony. Everybody knows this! And he was immediately demoted to third string quarterback. With Johnny Manziel, teams knew exactly what they were getting. That's why he fell in the draft. The talent was there, but the bust potential was undeniable. He was thought of as an all-time bust because of the hype he had in college. He was a famous quarterback who loved partying and being famous. And the Browns had the bright idea of taking a quarterback who loved partying and turning him into a millionaire. That celebrity party bitch status he embraced was exactly why he fell in the draft. That said, he was an immense talent who was super creative as a quarterback. I mean, granted, a lot of his highlights involved lobbing it to Mike Evans, which isn't exactly a terrible strategy. Johnny Manziel was so, well, not beloved in Cleveland, that literally after I had written this, he tweeted at a Cleveland radio host a very kind letter of, oh my God. Listen, I'm gonna read this and we're gonna have fun. I don't care. Riz, you stupid. These comments were made in October of last year, but of course you bored and the Cleveland media have nothing to speak about because your quarterback stopped banging massage therapists, and you can only speak about losing so much to all of the people that listen to this trash-ass show. My tenure in Cleveland was doomed by a lot more people than just B. I've taken plenty of responsibility for my failures in that building and in that city. By the way, have you spoken to or about the 6th overall pick in the draft that year, Justin Gilbert, lately? He was 8th. Or what about our all-world coach that was hired, Mike Pettin? Tom Brady couldn't have won with our roster from 2015. Just move on, off, and leave me out of this bullshit. That was a lot. So let's talk about Justin Gilbert. I know people think of Johnny Manziel as the more high-profile bust, and he probably is, but Justin Gilbert is the bigger bust. I know more people remember Johnny Manziel's name, and his position, and his money sign celebrations, and his nightclub lifestyle. But Justin Gilbert was taken 14 spots ahead of Manziel. People think of Johnny Manziel as the bigger bust because he was more high profile, but Justin Gilbert is the bigger bust because he was taken 14 spots before Manziel, and when I say his name to people, the majority of the time they say, who the hell is that? Which, exactly. Here's who Justin Gilbert was. He was the 8th overall pick out of Oklahoma State who made 3 career starts. He claims to have missed meetings because he was a heavy sleeper, and they thought to combine that with Johnny Manziel, a heavy drinker. What do you get when you cross a heavy sleeper with a heavy drinker? Me during COVID, but that's beside the point. Johnny Manziel's character concerns were ESPN debates. Justin Gilbert's character concerns were a bullet point on his scouting report. Johnny Manziel was the more publicized bust. Justin Gilbert was the bigger bust. And not to mention the Browns traded up for both players. When you have the litany of stars that the 2014 NFL draft had, and instead you draft 2 cocky dipshits, you will, in my eyes, be deemed co-champions. That will do it for this video. Thank you guys so much if you got to the end of this. I appreciate you the most. If you like this video again, click the like button and subscribe to the channel for the sexiest sports content on the internet and beyond. But for now, stay tuned for more sports content that you didn't ask for.